Thank you, everyone. I am so excited to be here. So before we begin, can we just get a round of applause? There's just been so much energy here. Woo! Let's do this. All right. Yes, that gets us into the energy. All right. So welcome, everyone, to our esteemed panel. I will kick things off by just giving a quick intro. I am Iba Massood, the co-founder and CEO of Tara AI. I started my journey into developer productivity over a decade ago with a thesis where I won a grant from MIT, specifically looking into commits inside GitHub. How do you go beyond commits when measuring developer productivity? And what can we do to really understand efficiency as we go beyond lines of code? So eventually, I formed a company around this problem. And as I formed a company, as we raised our venture funding, released our first product, we started onboarding our customers. And so here, who I have today with me are some incredible engineering leaders from VPs, director, and manager. We really wanted to get opinions across the board. And so today, Rebecca Yang, Lila Brooks, as well as Tanvi Shah will be sharing their experiences with developer productivity. I got to meet them and work with them over the last couple of months in my role at Tara AI. So we've been going deep into PR cycle times. We've been talking about investments, velocity, delivery, as we integrate with multiple different data sources. So I am going to kick things off right away. And my first question actually is for Lila. So developer productivity, as you folks know, it's been a hot debate over the last couple of months. There was the McKinsey study that was published. And then, in terms of as an industry, we started from Agile, moved into Dora, went into space. And there's so many subjective and objective metrics, right? And I think subjective is really when you look at things like lines of code, and which frankly do very little to truly indicate productivity. So Lila, in your opinion, what do you think is most important to measure and why?
Thank you. Great question. I'm going to first touch on what we decided not to spend time measuring anymore, and that is estimation accuracy. We realized there's no value in trying to debate, trying to discuss. This was 5 story points, but turned out to be 8 story points or 10 story points, and even a larger scale. There's no value in that, at least in our line of work. We're not doing that. What we are measuring now, first and foremost, is investment profile. By that, we're trying to measure where the team is spending most of our time. Are we spending 30%, 40% in deployments? Is that taking too much time off the team? Are we spending 20%, 30% in tech discovery? How much that portfolio, how does that portfolio exactly look like? So that's what we are first and foremost looking into. By the way we're measuring it, right now, obviously, we shifted using Tara, which is a great product. Before that, we were using Python scripts. We were using code that a bunch of our folks had written, and it was very ad hoc and unsystematic to do the job for us. It was doing the job, but it was not systematic. We switched to using an actual product that does that in a nice way for us. And the other thing we're actually really paying good attention to these days is observability. We're defining metrics for observability. We want to make sure that our products, not only we're capturing, obviously, errors and issues, but the most important user flows are being delivered to users correctly. There's a lot of times that no error, no alert by default for an alerting system is raised, but are the users seeing what they're supposed to see? Are you covering the most important use cases or critical use cases? That's what we measure through observability.
Thank you, Lila. I think one thing that's really interesting about what you mentioned with story points is that I keep hearing this from engineering leaders is that one of the biggest banes of their existence, frankly, is because you're trying to measure 2 things at once, right? It's mass, which is effort, and then complexity as well with one metric. And I think we can probably have a whole panel on just story points, so I'll pause there. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on what was just discussed?
Yeah, I I think it's super interesting that you decided that predictability is not important in terms of when you're estimating the relative effort of some sort of task. And I completely agree. And I think what I have found in my career is that when you have a higher degree of predictability, you're going to actually be moving slower. Because if someone says, I know with certainty that this is going to take X amount of time, they're baking in a lot of sort of wiggle room so that they can be sure they're going to hit it. And you actually don't want to encourage that from your teams. If you want them really pushing themselves, you actually want them to be comfortable with sort of putting themselves out there and maybe not actually hitting that. So predictability can actually hurt velocity.
That's a good reminder, folks. Predictability could actually hurt velocity. So you heard it here.
If I can add just one more comment to build upon that. If you're dealing with a lot of ambiguity, if you want to encourage the team to feel safe dealing with ambiguity, there's a lot of times we don't know what it takes to get the job done, because it requires tech discovery, it requires experimenting to decide between different options. So how does story points really represent this scenario? To make the team comfortable with ambiguity, just drop that mentality, I would say.
Yeah, I think one thing to add to this, I know, Lila, we had talked about this before, was like as the system was, so we were integrating with GitHub and Jira in MongoDB's case. And I think one of the things that was interesting was just seeing the PR cycle time evolve. And then you mentioned time to open being more critical.
Pickup time.
Pickup time, yes. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
100%.
And why?
So PR cycle time is one of the key metrics that we measure. One of the contributors to it is the pickup time, the time that someone opens a PR until the time that all the reviewers that have to review the PR actually pick it up and review it. It's not the review time, it's the time between the two. And we have distributed teams in different time zones. And we noticed that what happens is a lot of times, well, if you mark someone as a reviewer, they get a notification. A lot of times they didn't get that notification in time, or because they were busy doing something else, they would finish their day, ignore that, come back the day after, and sometimes that would lose a lot of time and context. So we actually try to find a better way that directly ping the people, which is a workaround at this stage, but just to make sure the pickup time in a distributed team is managed properly when you're dealing with different time zones, different people in different time zones.
Thank you, Lila. Rebecca, I wanted to follow up with a question. So, as we know, with a lot of the developer productivity tooling today, one of the biggest questions ICs and developers have is that, is Big Brother watching me? Is there, and it's funny, we have this we're like, oh, it's Tara, big sister. We're like, no. We're trying not to, I think ultimately one of the bigger questions is the surveillance piece, right? Which is something we're very cognizant of, we're very wary of. And this was one of our early theses from the very beginning, is that how do you actually have productive coaching conversations? So Rebecca, my question to you is, how have you had, just generally, how do you set up a system like this for fair evaluation, and even just turn it into opportunities for productive coaching in terms of having conversations around, let's say, review times or PR sizes?
Totally. I mean, no one wants to feel like they're being micromanaged, or Big Brother or Big Sister is watching them all the time. It doesn't make anyone feel safe. However, the data's there, and when you work at a company, there's a contract, and you know that that information's available. The way we've thought about it at Clearbit is we look at the data, and it's just one piece of a story. So I'll give you two examples. We were looking at Tara AI, and we were looking at how different developers were performing, or at least the Git activity over a month. And we saw two developers who hardly had any Git activity during that month. In both cases, we went and talked to the managers of those two developers and said, hey, there might be a totally reasonable explanation. Let's go dig in and see what's going on. In one case, there wasn't a reasonable explanation. We had an engineer who just wasn't really doing much work, and we had performance conversations. It led to a PIP, and ultimately, the more we dug in, the more we realized that there were a bunch of people on the team who were really frustrated, but they just weren't comfortable saying anything. And there had been sort of this frustration and pressure building. It just hadn't reached us yet. So it actually helped us surface that. In another situation, it was actually someone who, just the nature of the work that he had been doing was not reflective in Git. He was doing a lot of work on the data side at Clearbit. And a lot of that is sort of pulling data, running like SQL queries, and just sort of looking at minor changes. He had been working super hard. No conversation was needed. The manager knew that already, and we were able to move on. And so I think being curious, not making assumptions, and having conversations is the best way to sort of use these big brother metrics and actually drive performance from the team.
And Rebecca, as a just quick follow-up question, do you have any pointers or tips on how to have these conversations?
Totally. I mean, psychological safety is #1, which is no one wants to feel like they should have known something, or you're coming at them with sort of anger, frustration. So I always say to the team, the truth will set us free. So whenever I see someone who's maybe trying to hide a metric, they're afraid that like, oh, the sales team's going to see that our API's slowed down and they're going to freak out or something like that. We don't want to exist in a world where transparency is something people are afraid of because they're afraid they're going to be penalized. And so it comes from a place of, hey, let's just dig in and take a look. No judgment. We got this. And for the most part, we haven't gotten much pushback from engineers or managers with that approach.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that. And Tanvi, I know we had talked about the perfect metric and how to cross-check with the team. Do you have any comments or chiming in on?
So I'm going to start with, since Rebecca is from the data industry, I'm going to start with something that is very well known in the data industry, which is like torture the data enough and it'll confess to anything. So if metrics are swinging either side, either they're too perfect or they're too imperfect, that's a sign of trouble. Essentially, perfect metrics are coming at the cost of something else. So having metrics in tension with each other to achieve moderation and to hit the median most of the time is what I found in my career that seems to be driving even a healthy team dynamic. Because like if you think about space, right? Activity and collaboration are constantly at loggerheads with each other. PR cycle time versus code review is one thing. Like if you're trying to drive shorter and shorter PR cycles, hit that 4-hour PR code review or PR check-in time. How many times is the context of senior developers who are working on their own features as well as helping with code review getting interrupted, right? How many times are you doing mid-stage feature demos for your product managers, for your delivery managers, to make sure that you're delivering the right use cases? After delivery, is your design meeting the business case, right? So these 2 or 3 things that we use in tension also help in terms of coaching not just individual developers like Rebecca talked about, but you also want to coach the team dynamic. You want to find out what their blockers are. Are they having one-on-one conversations? In fact, it's very strange. People talk about Zoom fatigue, meeting fatigue, but one-on-one conversations are the biggest predictor of how successful or how happy developers are going to be.
And Tanvi, I would love to chime in right there. So we've talked about productivity and business outcomes, right? Because so much of developer productivity can, frankly, be a little disconnected from customer value or like generally how often are we, let's say, shipping to customers, or how much customer value are we generally delivering, and is it moving key business metrics? So Tanvi, we've had lots of conversations about this, of course, and I'm curious, like, so at Tara, we've been discussing about true impact and how that would mean just improvements in developer productivity that ideally would be directly related to better customer value delivered or a spike in revenue. So in your role, Tanvi, how have you tied developer productivity back to business outcomes? Because that's a question we get pretty frequently from
Right.
eng leaders.
So there are two things that I want to start with over here. Outcomes are achieved when output is driven by context. Very heavily loaded sentence there. But your metrics and KPIs are designed ultimately to measure how well you're tracking to an outcome, right? And the outcome is customer satisfaction is where it begins, right? But how do you achieve customer satisfaction if you don't have a happy team? So then you get into, OK, instead of developer productivity, or rather the very big brothery approach, how well am I enabling them? How well do they know the context? Because I've heard several different opinions saying, hey, if you leave it to the developers, they're definitely not going to make the right judgment for the business. They're going to prioritize tech debt. They want to do fancy stuff. Well, all of the above is true. But if you empower them with the business outcome that you're looking for, you're going to be surprised with what they come up with. Because ultimately, engineering software production is a creative job. It is a very, very creative job. You're designing all the time. You're refining all the time. You're looking for outcomes. And it's very interesting. So the way we look at it, we measure it in terms of feature health. So what does feature health mean over here? How satisfied are my PMs with the first cuts? How satisfied are my developers with what they're producing? How satisfied are they with the tooling that is enabling them to test and iterate rapidly? Are they staying in the flow stage more often, or are they getting interrupted or driving to a number? So is it an activity metric, or is it a feature health metric? When I talk about feature health, you're measuring business outcome, you're measuring performance, you're measuring reliability, you're measuring MTTR. MTTR is another interesting metric to talk about, right? In terms of MTTR, people think about, oh, how much deployment time, how quickly am I able to fix, how quickly am I able to respond? But how often do you really design for MTTR, right? Like monitoring your features, building in the overrides, being able to stop the runaway train, like React in production, stop anything that's hampering customers in mid-usage. So all of that is built into feature health and what we call feature readiness. Before you ship a feature, how well do your field teams even know how to react? How well do your support teams know how to react and respond? So all of these things tie into feature health, readiness, delivery, and because of this, my developers get interrupted less frequently.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned interruptions because I think one of the things that we kind of had conversations about as well was how do you go beyond Dora? Because the thing is that with Dora, there's only a very limited number of metrics. It probably paints, I want to say, 2% of the whole picture, at least in my research. And Lila, I would love to get your input and feedback on what's been said so far on business outcomes, and because we've had conversations about this too.
We've had indeed, and one thing I want to add to what she mentioned, which I 100% agree with, is cost of doing business. We want to see, and that's what we're trying to achieve, is whatever we're doing, whatever our investment portfolio is it actually reducing cost of doing business for us or not? If we're spending, say, if our investment portfolio shows we're spending unreasonable amount of time trying to deploy something because our CI/CD pipelines are faulty or are not optimized for something, if it shows that we're spending way too much time even in tech discovery, and the expenses and the cost of doing that does not justify, for example, the reduction in cost of doing business that it provides, then that's something that we need to be aware of. There's an opportunity there to go and change something or improve something. Cost of doing business could be anything, for example, for internal tools someone's building. We want to, and that's actually a real case scenario for us at MongoDB. Paying customers open support cases with us. There are support engineers on those cases, helping them, troubleshooting them, guiding them into a solution for them. There's a cost associated with that, obviously. Now, how are our tools and products, internal tools and products that are to support those support engineers, reducing the cost of doing business for us? How is it improving there? If it doesn't make sense, if we're spending this much to achieve this little in general, what's wrong there? So that's how we tie back developer productivity out of the investment portfolio into a very direct business outcome, which is cost of doing business.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's interesting about measuring an investment portfolio is that it allows for an understanding of what kind of investments did we decide we were going to make in tech debt, or keeping the lights on work, or maintenance, and where did we end up? Like, let's say at the beginning, at the end of the month, or at the end of a quarter. Because this was also something that we had talked about, right? Because you were assessing this, you were potentially assessing this on a bi-weekly basis. And I think like one thing that's interesting about this is that most engineering leaders don't realize just how much we've spent overall when it comes to like keeping the lights on work, KTLO, maintenance or support, versus net new features or just customer work generally. So it's interesting how that visibility gets really lost, especially with spreadsheets and Python scripts.
100%. And I would add, it's not just engineering leaders, it's the enterprise leaders, it's the companies, organizational leaders, it's business leaders. Like the CEO looks at these metrics, so.
Oh, do we have, oh, okay. That looks like we are out on the mic, so I have a second mic now. Awesome. So let's, in terms of, as we're nearing closing, my final question to the entire group is, so looking at today, as we're optimizing budget, optimizing cost, that's kind of the name of the game, and as especially potentially if we end up entering into a tech recession. So I think the question here is, as engineering leaders, as we optimize budgets and cost, does a good developer experience necessarily mean a better product? And do we have space to optimize for developer experience as we go forward?
I can. Is this working?
I think it's just for me.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
So I'll start with a kind of spicy take, which is the best developer experience is still having a job. And what I mean by that is many people in this room, like I know many people in this room, the executives at your company, maybe you're an executive at your company, you are staying up at night worried about whether your company is going to exist in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months. And like earnestly, candidly, the best developer experience is prioritizing business outcomes so that developers can stay employed and still have a job. I'm sure many people in this room have done layoffs. We certainly have at my company. And it's rough. And ultimately, this is my no BS answer. Developer experience is often used as sort of a catch-all for all of the work and projects that don't strictly fall into something that would show up in like a product roadmap or like an infra roadmap. And my take is that in this climate, you really need to think about the metrics. You really need to think about, and there's a few different ways to think about it, but I love the idea of cost of doing business. It's operational efficiency. If we can reduce how long it takes for tests to pass or run, like we can improve the number of things we're shipping by 15%. And that you're able to sort of tie it back to a business story. But ultimately, I think if you're not telling a very clear business story and you're just opining on why developer experience matters, this is not the best climate for that. Like it is going to fall on deaf ears.
I think as a follow-on point to that, one thing that we've been constantly talking about is just there's sales intelligence tools, right? There's customer success. Like to like I would say to a decimal point and to a fault, how productive your individual sales reps are, how productive your individual customer success reps are. And I think that's what's interesting, right? When it comes to engineering, it's such a black box. It's like we can't A, agree on certain metrics that are the most impactful. B, it's very difficult to basically pinpoint through all the spreadsheets, all the Word documents, all the different manual tools that we're using to really understand how productive is engineering, and especially when it comes to reporting back up to management and executive team. So I'm really glad you touched on that. And actually, funny tidbit, in our data set, we do benchmarks too, and we basically map out the highest performing teams. And Rebecca, your teams are our outlier data set, basically, which is some of the highest performing. And in fact, that's actually led us to, from a benchmark perspective, it's very clear to know that, and especially with over the last few months, you've had a flurry of releases and a flurry of product announcements. And now, as you all know, last week was announced, the big announcement with HubSpot acquiring Clearbit. I think it's just been so cool to see, like, over the last few months of us working together, just see the flurry of updates that have happened. And now, you folks are that outlier data set out of the thousands of teams that we have data on. So it's really cool that we're telling every team, be as productive as Clearbit. So yeah, I thought I'd just share that little tidbit.
Shout out to my team who's in the audience. You guys are the ones doing it.
Yes. Woo! Woo! All right. Well, folks, that brings us to an end. We have a couple of minutes remaining. And so what we just wanted to highlight, actually, are there any closing points or any closing? I think we have like 1 or 2 minutes to squeeze that in.
One quick comment to build upon what you just mentioned about developer productivity being a catch-all phrase for, I think that's evident, but sometimes lost in all the complexities we're dealing with. If a product is not the right market fit, no amount of engineering excellence can solve for that. And a lot of times, I've seen it happen. Like, I've worked at bigger corporations where every quarter, on average, there's a new product being released. And sometimes they fail, and it's because they're not the right market fit. And this is a product problem that a product needs to resolve. Engineering, DevX cannot solve for that. Engineering excellence cannot solve for that. And you need to be always aware and wary of it. You can iterate on it. You can iterate on the UX. It's not solving the user's problem. So what's going to achieve? So that's, I think,
really well said. Thank you. Thank you for that point, Lila. That brings us to an end of the panel. If you would like to have more discussions and debates around developer productivity, we are hosting a roundtable at 3 p.m. And basically, I'll be there at the roundtable. Our panelists are going to be in and out in terms of like their agenda. But we also have a booth downstairs. We're doing live demos of the product and of how we're enabling investments, delivery, and velocity. So please do take a look at the booth, and then the roundtable is at 3 p.m. And of course, we're available for questions, like right now, actually in between lunch. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.